If you grew up in the Lehigh Valley, you knew the glow before you knew the company. It came up over the south side of Bethlehem after dark, a low orange light pressed against the underside of the clouds, and it never went out, because the furnaces never went out. You could smell the coke works from across the river, a sweet, sharp, mineral smell that got into the curtains and the car seats and never fully left. And on a shift change, when the whistle went and 10,000 men moved at once, the sound of the rolling mill carried for miles, steel being squeezed into beams, the heartbeat of the valley. This was the largest steel company on Earth, or close to it. At its wartime peak, it employed 300,000 people. Its mill at Sparrows Point, outside Baltimore, sprawled across 5 square miles and put 31,000 men through its gates, with another 4,000 in the shipyard next door. In a single record year, it poured more than 22 million tons of steel, and the men who worked there did not think of it as a job, exactly. They thought of it as an inheritance. A father got his son on at the mill the way other men left their sons a house. One family in the valley counted up the years, the husband, the wife, the cousins, the in-laws, and arrived at roughly 300 years of collective time, clocked at the same company. Every July, the whole place shut down for 2 weeks, and the valley emptied toward the Jersey shore, because when the mill rested, the town rested with it. That was the arrangement. The mill was the weather. It was simply the condition under which everyone there lived. Now stand on that same ground today. 5 blast furnaces still rise over the south side, rust brown and silent, and on a summer night, they are lit up, not by molten iron, but by stage lights, because there is a concert venue at their feet now, and a casino across the way, where the men used to clock in. 300,000 jobs became zero. 22 million tons became nothing at all. The company that built the spine of modern America could not, in the end, hold up itself. And almost everyone will tell you the same reason why. Cheap foreign steel. The imports that flooded in and drowned an honest American industry. It is a tidy story, and its great advantage is that it blames no one in particular. The world simply changed, and Bethlehem was too big and too old to change with it. That story is wrong. Not partly wrong, wrong at the root. The imports were real, but Bethlehem was not killed by them. Bethlehem killed itself. It spent 30 years refusing to modernize its mills, while its executives built monuments to themselves, and its books filled with promises it never intended to fund. And we know it was a choice, and not a fate, because another American steelmaker stood in the very same flood of imports, made the opposite decisions, and is the largest steel producer in the country today. This is the story of how the company that built the things meant to last forever ran itself into the ground on purpose, one comfortable decision at a time. To understand what was thrown away, you have to understand what was built and who built it. The company began in 1857 as a small iron concern along a creek south of Bethlehem, and for its first decades, it was, above all, an engineering company. Its defining figure in those years was a man named John Fritz, who stepped off a train in Bethlehem in 1860 with his wife and young daughter and a patent for a new kind of rail mill. Fritz was an engineer to his bones, a man who measured success in tonnage and tolerance, in whether the thing he made held, and he set the company's character for the next century. He fired the first blast furnace in January of 1863, in the 3rd year of the Civil War. When he was old, he spent his own money building an engineering laboratory at the university up the hill. That was Bethlehem in its youth. A company that believed what it made mattered more than what it earned. And what it made was the structure of the country itself. In the 1880s, unable to beat Carnegie on cheap rails, it pivoted to armor and ordnance, and won the first great contracts to armor the United States Navy. By 1908, it had begun rolling a new kind of structural beam, the wide flange beam, the H-beam, taller and stronger than anything that came before. Without that beam, the steel frame skyscraper as we know it does not exist at the scale it reached. The skyline of New York is, in a real and physical sense, a Bethlehem product. Walk through the icons of American power and you are walking through this company's output. The Golden Gate Bridge, some 83,000 tons of its steel, shipped out through the Panama Canal, the Empire State Building, the George Washington Bridge, Hoover Dam, the Chrysler Building, and when the Second War came, the greatest industrial sprint in human history. 73 million tons of steel, 1,121 ships, nearly a fifth of the entire two-ocean navy launched from Bethlehem yards, 300,000 people on the payroll. This was the promise the company made to the country, and to the men who worked for it. We build the things that hold America up, and they last. I'll pause here only to say that this is the kind of story this channel exists for. The institution everyone agrees died of natural causes, opened up to show the cause of death was nothing of the kind. If that is the work you came for, you and I are after the same thing. Stay with me. The seed of the rot was already planted, and you can see it in a single number. In 1929, the company's president, Eugene Grace, took home a bonus of $1.6 million, among the very highest executive payouts in America that year. In the same season, the country fell into the Depression. The engineers' company had begun, quietly, to learn a different appetite. Not for tonnage, for extraction. For a while, none of it showed, because the war and the post-war boom hid everything. In 1957, Bethlehem poured more than 19 million tons of steel and earned $190 million. The outer numbers stayed magnificent, but the inner story, the engineering character Fritz had built, was already dying, and the men running the company could not see it because the money was still coming in. Here is where the real decision gets made, and it is not a decision made in a single meeting. It is a posture held for 20 years. Through the 1950s and into the 1960s, the rest of the steel world was adopting two new technologies: the basic oxygen furnace, which made steel faster and cheaper, and continuous casting, which eliminated whole, expensive steps. The basic oxygen furnace cost roughly $17 a ton to install. The old open hearth method Bethlehem clung to cost about $35. The newer way was cheaper and better, and Bethlehem knew it. Yet Bethlehem kept pouring its capital into the old furnaces. By 1970, after a decade in which its foreign competitors had rebuilt from the ground up, only 48% of Bethlehem's capacity used the modern furnace. Its research spending sank below 0.6% of sales. You can mark the moment the ground shifted. In 1959, 500,000 American steelworkers walked out in a strike that lasted 116 days, the largest work stoppage the country had seen. The union held its ground, and the companies absorbed the costs. But while the mills sat idle, the buyers had to get steel from somewhere, and they got it from abroad. Imports doubled, from 2 million tons to 5 million in a single year. They never came back down. The men in the executive suite saw a labor dispute they had weathered before. What they did not see was that they had just handed the future to someone else. And this is the point where I'd ask you to settle in, because everything up to now has been the setup. From here, the story stops being about bad luck and starts being about choices. The company spending lavishly on itself while it let its own mills go obsolete. And a younger competitor, looking at the very same imports, deciding to do the exact opposite. Watch what each of them chose. That contrast is the whole case. Consider the competitor first, because Bethlehem's defenders never want you to. In 1965, a man named Ken Iverson took over a small operation that would become Nucor. Nucor did not build vast integrated mills with blast furnaces. It built small plants that melted scrap steel in electric arc furnaces. Cheaper to build, faster to run, easy to start and stop with demand. It carried no army of retirees. It was largely non-union. It plowed its money into new technology relentlessly. Nucor faced precisely the same wave of imports that supposedly drowned Bethlehem. By 1987, it had built a plant that attacked Bethlehem directly in structural beams, the very product Bethlehem had invented. Today, Nucor is the largest steel producer in the United States. The imports were not a force of nature. They were a test, and one American company passed it. To be fair to Bethlehem, it did not look like surrender from the inside, because the company kept producing moments that felt like the opposite of decline. In 1964, it opened a brand new integrated mill at Burns Harbor, Indiana, on the shore of Lake Michigan, the last great greenfield steel mill ever built in America. The opening was a celebration. Steak and lobster. The governor of Indiana. Guests shipped in from Chicago on a special 19-car train. To anyone in the valley, it was proof the company was still in the business of building. But Burns Harbor was the exception that hid the rule. The same company christening a new mill with lobster would not spend the $17 a ton to convert the old ones. It built one new thing and let everything around it age. Now look at what Bethlehem did with the rest of its money. In 1969, it broke ground on a new corporate headquarters in Bethlehem, a 21-story tower, the tallest building in the whole Lehigh Valley. It was laid out in the shape of a cross, a cruciform, and the reason for that shape was simple and revealing. A cross has more corners than a rectangle, and more corners means more corner offices, and more corner offices means more executives could have the view. The company that would not modernize a furnace built a skyscraper to maximize the number of senior men who could look out a window. A worker's daughter put it as plainly as it can be put, standing at that tower decades later. This is where the money went that the workers never got. Then came the false summit. In 1972, Bethlehem booked its first $3 billion revenue year, and in 1973, it set its all-time production record. More than 22 million tons of raw steel and $207 million in net income. By 1981, it would post its highest sales figure ever, $7.3 billion. To the men in the cruciform tower, these were not the numbers of a dying company. They were vindication. But this is exactly how a rise to fall hides itself from the people living inside it. The outer body looks strongest in the months before the inner organs give out. The records of the early 70s were the peak of a company that had already stopped reinvesting in itself a decade earlier. The summit and the corpse were the same mountain, seen from different sides. The arithmetic finally arrived in 1982. The company lost $1.5 billion in a single year, 1 year after that record for sales, and went on to lose $1.7 billion across 9 quarters. It suspended most of its steelmaking. The closures came in earnest. The plant at Lackawanna, near Buffalo, which had employed 20,000 people in the mid-1960s, was cut to a skeleton crew and then effectively gone. And here, too, there was a turn that looked like recovery. Under Walter Williams, who took over as the crisis broke, the company did the brutal work, cutting, closing, restructuring, and it did not die. While rivals like LTV collapsed into bankruptcy in the 1980s, Bethlehem survived the decade, leaner and smaller, still standing, still casting steel. From the right angle, it looked like a turnaround. It was really a controlled bleed. The company was not recovering. It was being made small enough to survive a little longer, and every cut took another piece of the thing the men had inherited. The decisions compounded, each one making the next one worse. The company had been generous with its unions for years, not out of kindness, but out of avoidance. As one history put it, management found labor's demands easier to accept than to resist. Wages rose, pensions sweetened, and nobody funded the bill, because the bill would not come due for decades, and the men signing the contracts would be retired by then. By the end, Bethlehem had 5 retired workers drawing benefits for every single active worker producing steel. It was no longer a steel company that happened to have pensioners. It was a pension obligation that happened to make some steel. There was one more steadying before the end. When Curtis Barnett took the helm in 1992, he ran the late playbook of a dying giant. Sell the assets, cut the costs, hold the capital back. It worked, after a fashion. The company posted $4.5 billion in sales in 1997 and still employed more than 15,000 people. To an outsider, mid-decade, Bethlehem looked like a survivor that had found its footing. But footing is not a future. Selling the shipyard at Sparrows Point in 1997 brought cash in the door precisely because the company was selling the parts of itself it could no longer afford to keep. Each act of stabilization was another organ sold to keep the body breathing one more quarter. And here is the reframe. The thing the import story is built to hide. Bethlehem was a company founded on permanence. It made the beams and bridges and dams that were supposed to outlast everyone who built them. When the moment came to spend money to keep its own mills alive, to keep being the engineer it had once been, it would not do it. It built a tower for its management instead. Nucor, with none of Bethlehem's history and none of its glory, spent on the mills. That was the difference. Not the ocean of foreign steel. The choice of where to put the dollar. The home plant in Bethlehem made its final cast on a Saturday, the 18th of November, 1995. The last heat of iron flowed for an hour and 40 minutes, almost to noon. A steelworker named Herman Stengel whistled Amazing Grace over the plant's speaker system as the iron ran. Someone wrote, "Thanks for the memories," on a door. They stenciled the date onto the final cast. About 500 men lost their work that day directly. A man named John Tywald, who had given the company 42 years and had already retired, came back just to be there for it. They were all sentimental, he said. It brought back a lot of memories. Say what you want about the steel company. It was a great place to work. The corporate death came a few years after the industrial one. On the 15th of October, 2001, Bethlehem Steel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, carrying $4.5 billion in debt, with 11,800 employees left of the 300,000 it once had. And on that same day, the company cut off all health insurance for its retirees and their surviving spouses. The men who had given their lungs and their backs to the orange glow over the valley lost their coverage in the same motion that started the paperwork. It was never restored. But the true funeral was a date most people never heard. On the 18th of December, 2002, the Federal Pension Agency formally took over Bethlehem's retirement plan because the company could no longer pay it. 95,000 people were in that plan. 67,000 of them were already retired, already counting on those checks. The plan held $3.5 billion in assets against $7.8 billion in promises. It was 45% funded. $4.3 billion in pensions, simply gone. The largest pension collapse in the history of that agency at the time. The government caught most of it, but not all, and not the supplements, and not the health care, and not the shutdown pensions the union had been fighting for. The promise that had been signed so cheaply by men long retired came due all at once on people who had no part in making it. What happened next is the part that should make you coldest. A financier named Wilbur Ross had been buying up bankrupt steelmakers. In 2003, he bought Bethlehem, the mills, the equipment, the productive assets, for $1.5 billion. He did not buy the pensions. Those had already been handed to the government. That was the entire point. He took the parts of the company that could still make money and left the obligation to the retirees behind, where the taxpayers would carry it. The very next year, he sold the whole steel group he had assembled for $4.5 billion. The men who built the steel lost their health insurance. The man who bought the wreckage tripled his money in roughly a year. Today, the ground tells the rest. At Sparrow's Point, the last blast furnace standing, the one that wore the company's emblem, the Star of Bethlehem, was brought down in January of 2015. The site is a logistics park now. Amazon and Under Armour run warehouses where the steel was made, and the jobs there pay less than the steel jobs did. The cruciform tower in Bethlehem, the one built for the corner offices, was imploded on the 19th of May, 2019. 16,000 tons of structural steel dropping in seconds, while hundreds gathered to watch it fall. And the home plant became what you saw at the start. 5 rust-brown furnaces standing dark over the south side, a casino where the men clocked in, a concert stage at the furnace's feet. The numbers had stayed strong long after the company stopped being itself. That is the cruelest part of the whole arc. The engineer at heart had died sometime in the 1970s, when it chose the tower over the furnace and the bonus over the future. The bankruptcy in 2001 was only the day the paperwork caught up to a death that had already happened 20 years before. Even Billy Joel saw it before the executives would admit it. He put the valley in a song in 1982, the year of the great loss. Men out in Bethlehem, filling out forms and standing in line. And the former mayor still says that song haunts the place to this day. The culture knew. The men in the cruciform tower were the last to find out. Bethlehem Steel built the things that were meant to hold America up forever, and they have. The Golden Gate still stands. The skyscrapers still stand. Hoover Dam still holds back the river. The only structure this company could not build was one strong enough to hold up itself. And so the steel outlived the steelmaker, rusting in the open air above a valley it used to feed. So I want to hear from the people who were there, because the comments under this video are part of what it's for. Tell me 3 things. Tell me what the valley smelled like and sounded like at shift change. The glow over the clouds, the coke works, the rolling mill, if you remember it. Tell me who in your family worked the mill, and how many years your family put in across the generations. And tell me about the rituals, the 2-week summer shutdown, the trip to the shore, the company picnics, the day the layoff notice came. Whatever you carry, leave it down there for the rest of us to find. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, the real cause of death behind the official one, subscribe and stay with me, because there are a great many more American giants whose collapse was nothing like the story you were told, and we are going to walk through every one of them.